Okay, let's dive in. Have you ever faced a problem so complex it feels like your brain is just drawing, I don't know, capricious lines in innumerable directions?
Right.
Like that quote from Gaston Bachelard you shared from the source? It's that feeling, right? Just overwhelmed, not sure where to even begin.
Yeah, that feeling of unstructured chaos. It's sort of the defining challenge of trying to solve anything complex these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
So much information, so many moving parts.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, really. You've brought us some fascinating excerpts from this book, Green Triz to Solve Tea-Sleep Problems Perfectly, by Joseph Carlos Thecavidal.
Right. It's a source that promises a way to maybe bring some structure to that chaos.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission today is to really unpack this, get into the core ideas of Triz, that's the theory of solving inventive problems, and especially this idea of green Triz, and figure out how it acts as a toolkit, a systematic way to not just brainstorm randomly, but to actually invent and innovate, aiming for solutions that are sustainable too, helping you navigate those really tricky challenges.
Finding a pathway through the maze,
Yeah.
essentially, instead of just wandering.
Okay, so let's get right into it then. TRIZ. Fundamentally, what are we talking about here? And, where does the green part fit in?
Okay, so TRIZ, at its heart, it's a methodology. It came about from studying just like tons of patents, successful inventions, looking for patterns.
Patterns.
Yeah, patterns in how people solve difficult technical problems.
Mm.
The idea was to kind of reverse engineer innovation, find the recurring principles, the strategies that led to breakthroughs. So it gives you a structured way to tackle technical problems and, foster innovation.
Ah, okay. So it's like finding the common strategies, the cheat codes maybe for innovation based on what actually worked before.
You could sort of think of it like that, yeah. It helps move you beyond just random trial and error. And Green Triz, which the author Joseph TK also calls Trizolution in the source.
Trizolution, right?
It basically takes those core TRIZ-RE principles, but adds this really critical focus on sustainability, eco-friendliness. It's specifically designed, he says, to tackle a wider range of problems, which he bundles under this acronym T-SLEEP.
T-sleep. Okay, you got to tell us what that stands for.
Right. So T-SLEEP covers technical, social, legal, economic, environmental, and political challenges.
Wow, that's broad.
It is. You can kind of think of it like pestle analysis, maybe, but framed more around problems in each area that need inventive, sustainable solutions. Green Triz aims to hit all those marks.
Okay, so it's not just about making a better mousetrap, technically speaking. It's about the whole picture, the whole ecosystem of its impact.
Exactly.
And the author, Joseph TK, the source mentions his background, DRDO, Sharp, Titron valve. That's quite a mix.
It is, yeah. And I think that suggests these methods aren't, just stuck in one field. Defense, consumer electronics, industrial stuff.
Hmm,
It points to the versatility of the approach.
that makes sense. The source also makes a point early on distinguishing between creativity, invention, and innovation. That seems important.
Yeah, it's a good clarification. So creativity is just generating the ideas, right? The novel concepts.
Uh-huh.
Invention is actually creating something new based on those ideas, making the thing.
Gotcha.
But innovation, that's the crucial step of implementing it, bringing it to market, putting it into practice so it actually creates value, and then green innovation, or greenovation as the source calls it.
Greenovation. I like it.
That's innovation specifically aimed at, well, saving the earth, sustainable impact.
Okay. So Green Trees is the structured toolbox for getting to greenovation by inventively tackling problems across that whole T-sleep landscape.
That's a good way to put it. It gives you the tool to channel your creativity towards solutions that are not just clever, but also impactful and sustainable.
All right, let's open up this toolkit then. The source lays out some really interesting core TIZ tools. Where should we start?
Well, I think a really fundamental concept, the one that maybe sets TRIZ apart right away, is the ideal final result, the IFR.
The IFR, ideal final result. Okay, sounds very ambitious.
It is, and that's kind of the point. The IFR is like the theoretically perfect state,
Mm-hmm.
where the function you want just happens, with no cost, no harm, maybe even no system needed at all.
Whoa, okay, that sounds impossible.
Often it is, in reality. But the insight here is, by forcing yourself to envision that absolute ideal, you break free from just thinking about like small improvements to what you already have.
So instead of asking, how do I make this widget 10% better, you ask.
You ask, how does the function happen by itself? Like the source's examples. Boiling water instantly, no energy, no time. Or a house that cleans itself perfectly, no effort, no chemicals.
Right.
By focusing on that, even if it's impossible, it forces you to think about completely different ways to achieve the goal. It pulls you towards breakthrough thinking, acts like a compass.
Okay, I get that. It stops you getting stuck in the mud of the current solution. Powerful idea. What's next in the toolkit?
Then there's the concept of resources.
Resources, like what materials you have lying around.
It's much broader than that in TRZ, actually. Resources are everything available. Materials, yes, but also energy, information, time, space, existing functions, even things that seem like problems or waste products.
Huh, interesting.
The key idea is to look really hard at all these things, inside the system and outside, and think about how you could use them in unexpected ways. Often the solution involves leveraging something you already had but weren't seeing as a resource.
Finding hidden value? Okay, what else?
There's a tool for analyzing the problem structure itself, called the Sue-Field model.
Sue field, short for.
Substance field. It's
Yeah.
actually quite simple but very effective. You model the system by breaking it down into substances, which are basically the objects or components involved, and the field, which is the energy or information that connects them to make the function happen.
Okay, like the sources example,
Yes.
mixing liquids.
Exactly. The liquids are the substances.
Hmm.
The spoon, or maybe a motor, provides the field, the mechanical energy that interacts with the substances to get the mixing done.
Right.
By mapping it out like this, substance, field, substance, you can see very clearly where the interaction's happening, if it's harmful, if it's insufficient, if something's missing. It simplifies the picture.
Sort of like diagramming the sentence of the
Yeah,
problem. Okay.
right.
The source also mentioned patterns of evolution,
Yeah.
that systems change in predictable ways.
Yeah, that's another big part of TRIZ. Looking back at how technologies have developed, you see these recurring trends. Systems tend to move towards greater ideality, more function, less cost, less harm. They often get more complex, but also more efficient, maybe moving to micro levels, using less energy. The source lists a bunch of these trends, including things very relevant now, like, distributed intelligence and AIoT, data fusion. The insight is, if you understand these general directions of evolution, you can kind of anticipate where solutions might emerge, or even consciously try to push your system along one of these paths.
Like seeing the direction the river is flowing and using the current.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And to help you navigate those paths, especially when you hit a roadblock, you have the inventive principles. The source says there are 40 of them.
40. Wow, that's quite a list.
It is. But they're distilled from analyzing like millions of patents and innovative solutions. They represent common strategies for overcoming problems. They act as prompts, basically, to jolt you out of your usual thinking.
Okay.
The source gives some cool examples like extraction, just removing a problematic part, or nested doll, putting one thing inside another. Asymmetry, blessing in disguise, using a harmful effect to your advantage. Self-service, composite materials.
Interesting names.
The point is, these are like proven recipes for innovation. You don't have to reinvent the strategy itself every time.
They're like brainstorming prompts on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, 40 principles. How do you know which one to use when you have a specific problem, like a trade-off?
Ah, yes. That's where a really key tool comes in, the contradiction matrix. This is specifically designed for tackling those classic technical contradictions.
The trade-offs, right? Like you want something stronger, but that usually makes it heavier.
Exactly that. Or like your phone battery example, more life, but more weight. So what the matrix does is, first, you identify the two conflicting parameters using a standard list of like 39 common engineering parameters, the thing you want to improve and the thing that's getting worse.
Okay.
Then you look up that specific conflict in the matrix. And based on analyzing countless inventions, the matrix points you to a small number of inventive principles, usually 3 or 4, that have most frequently been used to solve that exact type of contradiction historically.
Whoa, okay. So if I look up strength versus weight, the matrix will say, try principle number 1 or 15 or 28, something like that.
Precisely. It gives you targeted suggestions. The source had those great aerospace examples, trying to improve aircraft weight conflicts with fuel efficiency. The matrix might suggest using composite materials or universality, making one part do multiple jobs.
All right.
Or if improving engine power makes emissions worse, it might point towards mechanical vibration or maybe periodic action. The key insight is that it leverages decades of collective problem-solving experience to suggest the most probable successful strategies for your specific conflict. It saves a huge amount of guesswork.
That's incredibly powerful. It's like having a giant database of successful hacks for specific engineering problems. The source also lists all those technical parameters you mentioned.
Yeah, that list is important. It provides the vocabulary, the standard features you use to define the contradiction, things like length, weight, speed, temperature, force. But also, importantly, the source includes IT-specific ones like usability, data accuracy, risk management.
Ah, so it's not just physical stuff.
Not at all. And broader ones, too, like cultural factors, regulatory compliance, aesthetics, safety, environmental sustainability. It covers a really wide range of attributes you might need to improve or manage. It gives you a structured way to describe the system and its issues.
A common language for the problems. Got it. Okay, one more big tool you mentioned. The Knowledge Base of Effects, KBE. This sounds scientific.
It is. The KBE is essentially a structured database or catalog of physical, chemical, biological, even psychological or sociological phenomena and effects from all branches of science and engineering.
Okay.
The core idea here is that the solution to your specific problem might already exist, just in a completely different field of science or engineering. The KBE helps you find it. You query it based on the function you need to perform or the effect you want to achieve.
So if my problem is, say, how do I move a small amount of liquid precisely? I could search the KBE for effects related to liquid movement.
Exactly. And the source actually mentions that specific example. It says there's something like 130 different known scientific effects for moving liquid using physics, chemistry, biology. Way more than you'd probably think of just brainstorming in your own specific field.
130 ways. Wow. That just cracks the problem wide open, doesn't it? Can you walk us through one of the case studies? The monkeys stealing oranges, one from the source. Sounded memorable.
Yeah, it's a good one to illustrate the KBE. So the problem is monkeys raiding an orange orchard. Simple enough.
Mm.
But using the KBE approach, you'd search for effects related to, say, deterring animals, creating barriers, influencing behavior.
Okay.
This leads you down different scientific paths. You might find effects related to aversion training, maybe using motion-activated sprinklers, drawing on psychological discomfort. Or you explore scent repellents that taps into biology, maybe using predator scents, or even, as the source suggests, planting lemon trees around the orchard because monkeys apparently hate the smell of lemons.
Lemon trees. Okay, that's clever.
Right. Then you might look at physical barriers that connects to engineering principles for netting or fencing design, maybe noise disturbance effects or visual deterrence. The point is, the KBE prompts you to pull solutions from psychology, biology, chemistry, engineering, diverse fields, leading to a richer set of potential solutions than just, say, building a bigger fence.
That makes total sense. It's a systematic way to bridge your problem to the vast library of existing scientific knowledge, not just relying on what you already know.
Exactly. It encourages that cross-disciplinary thinking.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here with these tools. The ideal final result pushing you towards breakthroughs, leveraging all available resources, analyzing systems with Suffield, seeing the patterns of evolution, using the 40 inventive principles, especially with the contradiction matrix for those tricky trade-offs, defining problems clearly with technical parameters, and then tapping into all of science with the KBE.
Yeah, they really form a kind of integrated system for thinking inventively. It aims to make the process more, well, systematic, less dependent on just waiting for a lucky flash of insight.
And GreenTriz specifically applies this whole structured approach to those complex T-sleep challenges we talked about at the start. Because those problems, technical, social, legal, economic, environmental, political, they aren't really separate boxes, are they?
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
And that's where the green aspect and the T-sleep framing really become important. The source gives some great modern examples of technical challenges, right? Like getting different brands of smart home devices to talk to each other, interoperability in AIoT.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
Or cybersecurity for online banking, optimizing supply chains using AI, rolling out electric and autonomous vehicles, sharing healthcare data securely. These things are inherently complex technically, and they change so fast. You need a systematic way in.
But as you said, solving the tech isn't enough if you ignore the people side.
Absolutely. The social challenges the source brings up are just as critical. Understanding how consumers actually behave, navigating different cultural views. The source mentions how symbols or colors mean totally different things in different places.
Right.
Plus, ethical dilemmas, social responsibility, the power of social media. You can have the best tech solution, but if it clashes with society or people don't trust it, it fails.
Makes sense. A flying car might be technically possible, but if society isn't ready or the infrastructure isn't there, it's not an innovation yet.
Exactly. And then layer on the legal challenges. Compliance is huge data protection laws like GDPR, labor laws, environmental regs.
It's a minefield.
It can be. Plus, cross-border rules, protecting intellectual property, data privacy concerns, contracts, risk management. The source emphasizes that building sustainable solutions means thinking about this legal landscape proactively from the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, so Green TIZ uses all those tools we discussed, IFR, Seufield, Principles, KBE, to tackle problems by looking at the technical, social, legal, economic, environmental, and political factors together, right? With that explicit goal of finding solutions that are also sustainable for the environment.
Yeah, it's about designing for the whole system.
Yeah.
Trying to avoid solving one problem here only to create 3 new ones over there, especially environmental ones. It pushes for that holistic view.
Giving you a framework to think through all those tangled connections. Now, the source, especially in the appendix, apparently lists a ton of other problem-solving methods, too. It's not just TIZ out there.
Oh yeah, it's a big field. The book catalogs quite a few, showing the breadth of techniques people use for ideation and problem solving. While the focus is clearly TIZ, a couple of others mentioned are pretty intriguing.
Smart little people? That one jumped out at me. It sounds whimsical.
It is definitely imaginative. Smart little people, or SLP, is this technique where if you're stuck on a problem, especially a physical system, you imagine shrinking yourself down, or maybe shrinking down tiny experts from different fields and having them walk around inside the system or the product. And you ask these miniature experts, like a tiny physicist, a tiny chemist, maybe a tiny user for advice from their viewpoint, right there within the mechanism.
Okay, I'm picturing little figures having a conference inside my faulty gadget.
Kind of. The insight is that by forcing this really unusual internal perspective and imagining input from diverse specialists living inside the problem, it can shake loose your assumptions and spark totally new ideas. It's a creative jolt, especially good for breaking mental blocks.
That's actually a really cool, playful way to reframe things. What about the other one you mentioned, ENVN? ENVN.
ENVN. It stands for environment. This is described as a model specifically for evaluating the environmental impact of an innovation, whether it's a product or a service. It's a structured approach to assessing how green something really is.
Okay, so how does it work? How do you do the evaluation?
Well, it seems to involve using a set of targeted questions, some possibly generated by smart, real people, actual experts in relevant fields. You use these questions to evaluate the innovation, often comparing it against older solutions or maybe different evolutionary stages of a technology.
Right, and there's like a rating system.
Yeah, the source mentions a common red, yellow, green rating. Red is bad, green is good or neutral. Yellow is maybe somewhere in between or uncertain.
Gotcha.
And there's this really clear table example in the source, comparing different types of aircraft, like a regular plane, a drone, a seaplane, an amphibian, across environmental factors. Things like fuel efficiency, emissions, noise, use of sustainable materials, infrastructure impact.
Okay.
And you can clearly see, using the red, yellow, green ratings, how the assessment highlights this shift towards greener characteristics in the potentially more evolved or specialized systems. It provides a systematic checklist, basically, to make sure sustainability is being properly considered and measured.
So ENVN gives you that structured scorecard for the environmental side, and the source mentions maybe even using expert systems, like AI, to help generate the evaluation questions.
Yeah, it hints at that possibility.
Yeah.
Using knowledge automation to make these environmental assessments maybe more objective, more comprehensive, and scalable.
Interesting. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've really gone deep into the source material today. We've unpacked TRZ and green TRZ as these systematic ways to approach problem solving, moving beyond just, random ideas. We looked at the core tools, thinking about the ideal final result, finding all the resources, breaking things down with Seufield, understanding patterns of evolution, using the inventive principles and the contradiction matrix to beat those trade-offs, defining things clearly with technical parameters, and tapping into broader science with the KBE.
A whole suite of structured thinking tools.
Right, and we saw how Green Tree Z applies these tools specifically to navigate those messy, interconnected T-SLEEP challenges, the technical, social, legal, economic, environmental, political stuff.
Aiming for that holistic, sustainable solution.
And we even touched on other cool techniques, like asking advice from smart little people or using the ENVN model for environmental checks.
Yeah, it's about replacing that feeling you started with, drawing those capricious lines with a more focused, insightful way to find inventive and really importantly, sustainable solutions.
And for you, the listener, the value here is, well, it's huge, isn't it? This isn't just abstract theory, it's a practical framework. It can help you cut through all the noise and complexity when you're facing a tough challenge.
Yeah.
It gives you these different lenses, these prompts that can genuinely lead to those aha moments you might miss otherwise. And it keeps nudging you towards solutions that are better, not just technically, but for the whole system, for the planet.
It offers a way to approach really daunting problems with a bit more confidence, maybe a clearer sense of direction.
Absolutely. So maybe here's a final thought for you to take away today. Think about a complex problem, something you're wrestling with right now. Could just taking a moment to imagine the ideal final result, even if it seems utterly impossible, spark a completely new angle?
Or what about breaking it down into its fundamental substances and fields? Might that reveal the core issue more clearly?
Or, hey, maybe even just playfully asking your imaginary team of smart little people inside the problem for their advice? Could that shake something loose?
Just considering one or two of these concepts might genuinely shift how you see the challenge.
Definitely something to think about. And we really want to thank you, our listener, for bringing this fantastic source material to us for this deep dive. Seriously, there was so much to dig into here.
Yeah, it's sources like this, rich with practical ideas, that make these conversations so rewarding. Really appreciate it.
So please keep them coming. Share your articles, your books, your notes. We are always eager for the next deep dive.